All right, Christine, what words of wisdom do you have for us?
Words of wisdom. The number one thing I could tell you about Philmont transportation is know your dates. Many, many, many times, people that have not been to Philmont or have not done the organizational end of it don't understand the date structure. By the time they get to me and they fill out my form and I realize the dates don't match up, I'll say, this doesn't coincide with a Philmont track. It could be too late. They've maybe already bought their train tickets or their airline tickets, and we all know those are not easy to change. So the number one thing people need to know is if you know your expedition number, and even if you're not the person who is the contact, you're someone else in the troop who's handling this, the number one thing you need to know is the expedition number. So your expedition 614, whatever the letter is, A, B, C, D, it doesn't matter. 614 means you need to be in Philmont base camp checking in before lunch on June 14th. From that date, and if you tell me you have a 7, 9, 12, or an 8-day cavalcade, I can tell you exactly what dates you need, and we can figure out what date you should come in, depending on how many days in advance you want to come ahead. So for instance, if you have to be at base camp by June 14th, 614 expedition, and you have a 7-day trek, you're going to depart on June 21st. A 9-day trek is going to leave on the 23rd. A 12-day trek is going to leave on the 26th. And if you have that 8-day cavalcade, you're going to leave on the 22nd. If you are absolutely not sure, if you're new at this, call someone, check in with Philmont, call someone, get in touch with somebody who's done it before, because the last thing you want to do is have to pay extra fees to change tickets, or find out that you have to spend 3 days before Philmont, which wasn't in your budget, or now you suddenly have days after Philmont, which when you really just want to go home and get in your own bed. There are several ways to arrive at base camp. You can leave home in your troop van or charter a bus from a local bus company and drive cross country. I'd really like to hope that only people doing that are maybe from Texas or Kansas, Colorado, maybe Iowa, something like that, someplace close where it's not more than a day, really a day's travel. You can take the train to Raton. And I say Raton because I highly don't recommend the train into Denver. Amtrak does go to Denver from Chicago or from someplace out in California. However, that train is notoriously late and very late. It is a second-class passenger train. So in other words, freight trains are number one. So you don't want to be stuck there. And we've had groups arrive 8, 10, 12 hours late. So Denver is not recommended for train travel. Raton seems to do a little better, although I will talk a little bit more about the pitfalls of train travel. You can fly into Denver, Colorado Springs, or Albuquerque. Now, you may look and see a bunch of other regional airports. Those are not for you at this time. You want to pick one of those 3 major airports. You can then rent vans and drive yourselves. Take a scheduled shuttle, which means you are sharing with other people and maybe have to wait around. And that also means you have to be in by a certain time. Make sure you get your baggage and can be waiting at the shuttle spot. Or you can do private or shared transportation with a charter bus company. Things to consider for each one of those modes. If you drive from home, you're taking a huge liability, okay? Huge liabilities. Driving from home was meant to be going to your local scout camp or a local amusement park, a local activity. It's really not meant driving cross country. There's a whole bunch of things you need to know. So look that up in your rules and regulations for scouting, because you're really not supposed to drive all the way from home if it's more than 250 miles, I think. You might have delays, you might have breakdowns, road issues, varying fuel prices across the country. Not to mention you will be exhausted when you arrive. You now have to trek. And then after you trek, even if you're only 5 days in the woods, you have to drive home. And if there's just 3 of those adults driving, that's going to be exhausting, right? So that's not highly recommended to drive yourself from home. I know some people think that's the least expensive, and we do want to be budget conscious. The train has had many issues. More time. If you're going to do a 12-day trek, think of the dads that don't get all those days off. You need at least 2 days on the front end and 2 days on the back end for train travel. So a 12-day trek may not be what you can do because they may not get enough time off. It's not usually on time, and there are a lot of last-minute cancellations. Matter of fact, I think this past summer, someone came off the trek and found out that their train had been canceled, had to buy airline tickets at the last minute, and they called us for the bus back to Denver. So that's a huge expense, when you're buying day of airline tickets. The train has its issues. There are also, derailments, and those things have happened over the years as well. If you fly into Denver, you need to allow an hour to get your bags. Get from your gate, get off the plane, gather everyone, use the restroom, make your way out to the main terminal and wait for your bags. And that's at least an hour before you get onto your vehicle if you have a shuttle you're meeting or a charter bus. If you're going to rent, you now have to go out and get on the rental shuttle and go out to the rental lot. Okay, so you're adding at least another hour there. And then we're going to say that it's going to take about 6 hours to drive between Philmont and Denver. I know Google Maps says 4.5. You want to cut it that close? I don't, especially not around a holiday weekend, not on a Saturday or Sunday. Denver's doing lots of changes and new things, but that doesn't always mean it's good. Matter of fact, they just closed down the A Bridge. So they took away one place you could check in. So you need at least 2 hours for your security line and your check-in, and you need at least 6 hours for the drive time, and add another hour if you have to return a rental vehicle. Colorado Springs, from my point of view, ground transportation, Colorado Springs costs a little less. You only need about 30 minutes to get your bags and to get out of the airport. If you're renting, you can just get the rental counter is right at baggage claim at Colorado Springs. So that's a big help. And it's not far out to walk to get to the cars. They're right out there in the parking lot. You do still want to leave extra time to return that vehicle, but you only need about an hour and a half check-in to get through security, check-in and security at Colorado Springs. We do allow about 4 hours driving between Colorado Springs and Philmont, and that usually includes stopping for a meal. And the Denver 6 hours included stopping for a meal as well. Albuquerque is similar to both of them. So 30 minutes to get your bags and leave the airport. If you're renting, you will need to board a shuttle and go out to the rental center. So you definitely want to leave extra time if you have to return a vehicle on the return. About an hour and a half for check-in and security. Sunday, Saturday, July 4th, maybe add a little more time. And we allow 4 hours for that drive as well. And that includes a lunch stop. They all have good and bad. You just have to be aware of what your timing. No matter how you're getting to camp, you should plan to arrive in Colorado or New Mexico the day before your expedition. Okay, so 614, you want to arrive Colorado or New Mexico on the 13th, at least the 13th. You can come on the 12th, the 11th, the 10th, if it's in your budget, but at least one day in advance. You can choose to stay at an airport hotel and not take transportation to camp till the next day. If you just want to get in, maybe you get an 8 o'clock at night flight and because it was super cheap. That's fine. You can choose to take transportation or whatever it is and get down to the little town of Cimarron. You can stay at the Hikers Cimarron Inn. And I do believe the St. James will be reopening. I think I heard maybe somebody is going to reopen that. So there's a couple places to get down there in December.
Yes.
And there's
Very good.
there's lots of beautiful camping around Mount Wheeler also in Eagle Nest Lake.
Yeah.
If you want to get low altitude,
If you come in through Albuquerque and you want to come up around that way too, yes. Especially if you drive yourselves, yeah. If you have your own vehicle. If you have your own vehicle, you have a lot more leeway, but it's good and bad. You have good and bad. You're also leaving a vehicle sitting in base camp in that sweltering heat, which you can come out to dead batteries and flat tires. And you got to think of that too. You can check in at Philmont a day early. Now, don't just show up and say, hey, we're here a day early, because they don't like that. They're very organized there at Philmont, and they would like to know that you would like to come a day early. I think you do that through your portal. It requests to come in a day early, about 4 hours from Albuquerque Airport. And that would include like a bathroom stop, meal stop. If you're sightseeing, add a little bit more time. What I'm talking about is basically straight transportation, just getting there. But if you can check in at Philmont a day early, that does a few things, a few advantages. One, if you come or just come into the area early, you're going to acclimate. You might be able to get some sightseeing. You're less stressed than arriving so close to when you meet, like coming in the day of is almost unheard of. You might be able to tour the Villa Philmonte if you check into Philmont early, or maybe go to the Natural Scouting Museum, meet up with other scouts, spend some more money at the Tooth of Time Traders. Just don't buy everything, because I like to go spend my money there too. And if you're taking a charter bus, and I say this because I built this list from things we've heard in the past, don't take a charter bus and say we're going to spend the night in Raton unless you absolutely have something you have to do in Raton, because you have to pay for the bus the next day also. So most of the time, if you get on a bus in Denver or Colorado Springs, it's a rate, it's going to take you all the way to Philmont. And that's a one-day rate. If you take that bus and you go to Raton, you now have to put that driver up and then pay for the next day's transportation. Doesn't make sense to stay in Raton unless you have something you want to do there, and then you release the driver and you work it out with Philmont that you get on the train, the bus that comes to pick up the folks from the train. I guess that's a doable thing. It just seems if you're already on the shuttle bus, go all the way to Philmont, or at least all the way to Cimarron. Flights, you should take the earliest flight into Colorado or New Mexico. Departure flights, they say you should leave Philmont after breakfast. We have left at all hours of the day and night. I know they don't recommend that, but you want to make sure you arrive at base camp usually by 5 p.m. I think that's what we try to get everybody in there. 4:30 if you want to have dinner. Get a flight that's mid-afternoon to early evening. Those seem to be the best times for transportation. Always be willing to share a bus. Sharing, at least in my world, in Leading the Way tours, if you share, you save. Okay. If you share a bus with another group, which best sharing happens from Philmont back to the airport, we will give you a refund. If you've already paid in full and we get a bus share, you get a refund, or you split the price. We handle all of that. We introduce you all through email. You can touch base with the other group beforehand, but sharing saves money. It's like buying at Costco or Sam's Club. If you can buy in bulk, so the big bus with the most seats, everybody pays less per seat. So sharing is always good. We only share with other scout groups. So it's not like we'd say we picked up another group and we're just dropping them off at the airport along the way. It's all scouts. We work with all scouts. Now they might be going to different airports or other scout camps, but really for the most part from Philmont, that's all we're doing from Philmont. The other thing that people don't realize is you can arrive one way and go home another way. So you can arrive by train and go home by air or vice versa. You could arrive into Denver because you really want that nonstop flight, and there's a lot of those into Denver. And you can go home through Albuquerque either to see different sites or because it's less expensive. So you don't have to be locked into just a round trip with one airport. So you can mix it up. And advantages of working with us. Again, we're going to look for that bus share, especially for the small groups. We're seeing in the last summer and this summer coming a lot of groups that are just 8 or 10 people. So we're going to look to find you a bus share and save money. I'm local in Colorado Springs, so I'm always here. My phone's on 24/7 if you need help. We even help groups that we just happen to run into at Garden of the Gods that get stranded. Even if you pay in full, we do offer a refund. And the best thing to do with me, and I say check this with all of the companies you're working with. For me, if you were to call me today and you booked a bus, you pay me a deposit, $125 a day for a deposit. And you have up until 30 days prior to travel to cancel that and get a full refund. So if you want to make sure you have something secured while you're shopping around, that's the way to do it. Now, I say that I don't know what everybody's refund policy is, so that's why I say check that. That's the way to do it. We sold out so many days last summer, and Philmont wasn't even at its busiest last summer, like it has been in other years. So get something booked. And if you find something better, and also once you're booked, that is more fodder. That's better when other groups contact us for us to say, hey, I got a group that'd like to share. There's a lot of things to think about with transportation. Budget number one, I say budget number one, but before you book your airline tickets or before you book the train, call around and find out what the other things are going to cost. What's it going to cost to rent a van and drive yourselves? What's it going to cost for ground transportation if you go on just a shuttle where you have to wait for everyone to arrive? And what's it going to cost if you do private transportation, which could turn into private charter shared? Before you book those airline tickets, get those prices, because in addition to the price of Philmont, your airline or your mode of transportation to Colorado or New Mexico, plus your ground transportation while you're here, are probably your three largest components for the trip. One last thing is, this is not the time, if you're flying, this is not the time to use your frequent flyer miles. You want everybody to travel on one record locator as best you can. You can get 10 people, get a group discount ticket through the group desk at almost all the airlines. Get everybody booked together, everybody on the same plane. Save those frequent flyer miles for something else, especially if you have transportation waiting for you at the other end. A bus driver can only stay on duty for so long before they have to go with just the 6 people that showed up and the other 2 or 4 because they took a different flight, get left behind. Again, make those phone calls, gather all the information before committing, and know your dates. That is the number one thing we see problems with, is new folks going to Philmont are just unsure of their dates, and that can be a costly mistake. So that's what I've got. If anybody has any questions, let me know.
Well, I would throw out one thing that living here in Kansas, you don't want to drive through western Oklahoma, western Kansas. That's a boring 4 hours across our states to get to New Mexico. And there's places in western Texas, you'll see a sign that says next gas station 150 miles away. And that's true. That next gas station is 150 miles down the highway.
Yeah. The other thing is, while we all love our scouts, depending on how far you have to travel in a van with them, they are quickly going to be bored. I know they have their phones and but there'll be stretches of highway where there's no internet and they will be itching to get out of those seats. So at least on a bus or an airplane or the train, they can get up and walk around. A lot of things to consider. And sometimes it's worth a little bit of extra money to do some of those other things. Just think, when you're flying home, you get home so much quicker back to your own bed and your own shower rather than having to drive yourselves or drive back to the airport. So there's a lot of complications with the highway out here as well. There's only one. Some areas have secondary roads. We just don't have that. And that's why we build in plenty of time for your travel. When people say, oh, it's 4.5 hours. Yeah, Google Maps, maybe you on your motorcycle, but not if someone needs to eat, if someone needs a bathroom. The buses just don't go up the Raton Pass at the speed of, just a 4-passenger vehicle. I will say in 30 years, I've never had anyone miss a flight. It just doesn't happen. We've been close. We've had flat tires, but we've been close, but we have never missed a flight, ever. Knock on wood.
I don't know if you mentioned it, but you have something on the website about other things like turning it into a tour, not just the transportation. Do you want to speak to any of those additional options?
Sure. If you have more time or more money, because obviously staying overnight costs more money, you can add. If you want to come in 1 or 2 nights, and I say that because you don't really need more than that, 1 or 2 nights in advance. You come in 1 night in advance and we pick you up at the airport. We're probably going to do a tour of the Air Force Academy, Garden of the Gods, maybe one other thing, maybe even do a hike at Garden of the Gods. And that would be a 1-night package. We'll overnight at a hotel here in Colorado Springs. We'll feed you all along the way, get you up in the morning, get you down to Philmont, and then bring you back. So our package will include all of that. It'll be a A1 price, kind of thing. Maybe just have to add some lunches. We usually don't include lunches just because it depends on what time people arrive. If you have an extra day to spend, you can do things like the COG train to the top of Pikes Peak, or maybe go whitewater rafting down the Arkansas River. You come in through Albuquerque, you can do some whitewater rafting on the Rio Grande, or you can go out to some sites in Albuquerque. There's some nice museums. There's the petroglyphs. You can go out through Angel Fire and Taos. So there's definitely some things to see through arriving through all the different airports. Just know that those things add money to your trip.
A lot of people are looking for altitude acclimation time. So
yes,
so
that really helps to come in a day or 2 in advance, especially if you're coming from someplace like sea level. The good thing is, if you have to really kind of have to arrive 1 day in advance. You cannot get to Philmont for let's say we were talking about that 614 expedition. If you fly into any airport or come by train, you can't arrive at Philmont before lunch. There's no flights or a train that arrives to allow you to get there before lunch. So you'd already be behind. Your goal is to get to base camp before lunch, get checked in, meet your ranger, stow your gear, get some lunch, and then all those things that have to happen on day 1 so you can be ready for a trail bus the next morning. The good thing is that you do spend the night at base camp, so there's a little extra acclimation there. So if you come in on the 13th, you also have the night of the 14th for acclimation. So there's a little bit, but if you're really concerned about it, try to come a few days in advance. Just know that each day you add in advance does add money. If you're a small group, we usually recommend that you rent a van and do some sightseeing on your own. Park that van or return that van and let us drive you to and from the airport to Philmont. Most people rent through the airport and back because, again, you don't want to be stressed getting to Philmont or having to drive after you've done that trek. Definitely seeing some sights. And I say that's secondary because even though I am a tour operator and that's what I love to do, getting to Philmont is the main goal. And right now with prices, the economy the way it is, we try to offer as cost-effective transportation as we can. We love it when people can add some extra stuff to their tour, but we understand that it's not always doable.
And for those worried about acclimation, just throwing out there, whether you fly into Denver or Colorado Springs, that highway running all the way down to Cimarron, you're sitting at about 8,000 feet, even sitting on a bus or van. And so for a lot of people coming from lower elevation, you're sitting at base camp level or slightly higher than base camp level that entire drive down. I'm just glad that she didn't offer Manitou incline and stairs as part of her
I can't do that,
tour
so I'm not.
package.
Some crazy people might want to. I'll answer Brian. Yes, you do get to choose your add-ons. We, of course, work with certain outfitters and certain things within the area. Like we have a particular rafting company we work with. You can choose your add-ons. We usually let you know what those prices are, so you can do some of those things based on your budget. Also, we try to steer you within travel time. So we don't want you just running all over, wasting time just traveling. We try to do things in kind of an order, a stepping stone kind of order. Usually day one, Colorado Springs and Denver, we try to do things that don't cost money. That's why I say Air Force Academy and Garden of the Gods, because a lot of the vendors will not refund if you are late, or if your flight was to get canceled or something, you would be out that money for, let's say, rafting. We would lose the rafting money. But you wouldn't usually raft on day one, but Cog Railway, we've had groups do that on day one, which is kind of dangerous with all that extra altitude, but groups have done it. But you'd lose your money if your flight was late. So we try not to do costing activities on day one. We do things like the hike around Air Force Academy and hike at Garden of the Gods, weather permitting.
One other thing that I've heard other people say about doing add-ons before a Philmont trek, especially things like whitewater rafting, is the risk of injury. Mm-hmm. It would really suck to get hurt before you go on your trek.
Right. And to that, I've had groups that say they want to do it after. And most people have come back to me and said, yeah, no, after the trek, we want to go home. So that being said, there is such a thing as biking on Pikes Peak. We highly don't recommend that. Like, I don't even put that as an option. If someone was to ask me about it, I can hook you up with those people, but I don't recommend that. That's seriously very dangerous. Hiking the incline, again, that's an awful lot of altitude. During 2018, during the fire, we had a group actually come out and spend 4 or 5 days. And on their 5th day, they started hiking up Pikes Peak. We had a young man not make it. I had to bring him down. And then 2 days later, when they made it to the top, I drove up to meet them, and another young man was sick. And we had to get him down. So the super strenuous activities before Philmont, every group, every troop, every council has their own take on it. We have some groups that come out and do the pterodactyl at Cave of the Winds. If you've never seen that, you definitely want to look that up. But it's this big giant swing out over the canyon. And other troops have told me, absolutely not, that's too dangerous, we won't do it. It's not dangerous. I mean, I think it's pretty secure, but it's a riskier thing, and some groups say yes and some groups say no. And my goal is to get you to Philmont safely and as cost effectively as possible. If we can add activities, we would love to. One other thing I can add about that is some folks would like to add activities when they arrive in Denver and on the way to Philmont, but that's not possible. That's 10 hours for the driver that day, and that's all he gets or she gets. While you may only be on the bus for 6 hours, that driver still has to return. So coming in through Denver, if you would like to do sightseeing, you do have to spend that extra day. If you come to Colorado Springs, we might be able to sneak in an Air Force Academy or a Garden of the Gods. That's usually doable. And there are some airlines and few locations around the country that are now doing nonstops to Colorado Springs. And my ground transportation is less expensive from Colorado Springs. That's another thing I do point out to folks, that you should check Colorado Springs. Don't just assume Denver is your only nonstop option.
You guys can keep talking. I'm just going to show you what it's like to ride on the bus. This is short, by the way.
Oh, there's me.
So
yeah,
it is you. So when you run these buses down to Philmont, do you bring them back empty, or do you stay overnight?
It depends on the scenario. Every day's scenario is different.
Okay. So you try to maximize your loaded miles.
We try to be live in both directions. With the traffic and with the construction, it's been very hard to do a down and back with groups going back to Denver. Like to go from Colorado Springs to Philmont to Denver, the driver has to come back to Colorado Springs. That will push them over 10 hours. So it's not been very doable, although we can sometimes get a secondary driver and do it for a little extra money. But if it's a Colorado Springs round trip, we do that. If we see there's a morning pickup the next day, we will usually overnight that driver in Raton, or maybe if we can get them a spot in Cimarron, we'll do that because we're trying to save on the fuel and, that kind of thing. So whenever we can do that, I work very closely with Ramblin' Express dispatchers, trying to figure that out wherever we can save and not have dead miles whenever possible.
That was amazing information. Thank you so much. We really appreciate that. Thanks, Brian, for asking a few questions out there in the chat. I think this is going to be super helpful. And especially people don't know what they don't know. And if you've never done this, you don't know some of the things that you said, like if your flight's canceled, you lose your money for some of those activities or things that may be too dangerous. So it's great to have that inside information. We really appreciate that.